Does how we frame history affect human flourishing? That is the question we are going to explore today. Welcome back to Liberty's Hill, where we explore the question, how can we create a world of human flourishing with liberty, justice, dignity, and prosperity? I am Dr. Bill Brannan, a pastor at Life Springs Church in Liberty Hill, Texas. History is extremely important because our identity, purpose, and significance are intertwined with it. It is not just about facts and events, but about our interpretation of their meaning. It is our memory which is deeply tied to who we are. What we choose to remember and what we choose to forget is very important. In a relationship, if we choose to remember people's faults and offenses and forget what is good, true, and beautiful, then we are in the process of destroying that relationship. When we choose to remember all of the ways people have hurt us or our failures, we create a prison that robs us of the joy of living in the present and endangers the trajectory of our future. In a practical way, how we frame our history has an immediate effect on internal liberty and can ultimately affect external liberty, especially how we frame our corporate memory. There is an interesting idea in Deuteronomy 23:7 that highlights the importance of how we frame history. The Israelites are told not to hate Egyptians because they were sojourners in their land. What an amazing framing of history. Didn't you mean to say you were enslaved and cruelly oppressed by the Egyptians? Both statements are true, and Scripture uses both of those statements in positive ways. When dealing with being oppressed as slaves in Egypt, Scripture frames it as an incentive to adopt ideas and values that will create a world of human flourishing and to remember how God delivered them from slavery so that we can know that tyrants can fall. In other words, it frames that fact in the hope of creating a better world and the hope that no matter how bad things get, liberty can triumph over tyranny. How we frame history directly affects our lives. Much of the book of Exodus is about the Israelites wandering in the wilderness for 40 years on their way to the Promised Land. The goal is to enter the Promised Land and create a world of liberty and human flourishing based on the ideas and values in Scripture. The years wandering in the wilderness was the time it took for the ideas and values to become enculturated enough in the people for them to handle the responsibility of liberty. The imagery is clear when we think that the Israelites in the wilderness were provided miraculously with manna from heaven and water from a rock, but all that stopped once they entered the Promised Land. This is the imagery of a child growing up and becoming responsible. A child cannot provide food for themselves. When they grow up and are ready for the responsibility of liberty, they are ready to enter the Promised Land. Deuteronomy is Moses' retelling of the law in preparation of entering the Promised Land. It is not a regurgitation, but a retelling after he personally owned the law and internalized it for 40 years. He could see the dream of liberty lived out in his mind's eye. It is not about the rules, but about the world the rules create. The best way to understand what I mean is to think about a sports game. We can read the rules of a sport like football or basketball, but when we see a game, we get a whole different picture. Each set of rules creates something different. The rules give form and structure to a game. Without them, they do not exist. Creating a world of liberty and human flourishing is far more complex than a sports game. By internalizing the dream of liberty in our hearts and minds, we are able to evaluate ideas and what their impact will be on the world we want to create. Moses understands that how the Israelites remember and frame the history of their time in Egypt will either promote or destroy a world of liberty. He understood that they would never succeed in creating a better world if they held on to hatred and resentment or owned the identity of being slaves of Egypt. I have to wonder if part of this understanding came from meditating on the story of Joseph, who was externally a slave in Egypt, but never owned that identity internally. He went from prison to practically running the nation because he never succumbed to a slave mentality. His identity was rooted in the ideas and values of liberty. All of this becomes even more important when we realize that the biblical dream of liberty was not only meant for Israel, but was meant for all of the nations on the earth. Not only could Israel never achieve a culture of liberty while holding on to hatred, But their choice to frame history negatively would also hinder the possibility of liberty being exported to Egypt. I chose to explore the idea of the importance of framing history with the Bible so that we can evaluate those ideas in the context of modern America. There has been a battle over how we frame our history. As we have drifted from a culture based on the ideas and values of human flourishing, we have become a culture of power where might makes right. One of the ways this happens is by framing history in a way that divides people and creates a slave mentality. The Egyptians saw that the Israelites were numerous and could physically throw off their slavery, but it was impossible for them to do so because they enculturated a slave mentality in them. As the years in the wilderness proved, they lost the ideas and values that liberty is built upon, and they needed to be cultivated again. One of the ways we see a framing of history that destroys liberty and human flourishing in America today is over slavery. Slavery is part of our history, and it is evil. How we frame that fact in history is very important for developing a world of liberty. The fact is that many early Americans were against slavery, and the ideas and values that they founded America on put us on a trajectory to end it. The history of slavery in America is more complex than many people realize. Reading Thomas Sowell is a great place to start if you want to understand it better. We are not going to get into those complexities in this video, but we'll mention that culturally people are realizing that every person has ancestors who were slaves. Slavery was the norm in world history. What is surprising is how Western civilization, having adopted the ideas and values of liberty, specifically from Scripture, ended slavery. What we see in America is that as we have framed slavery in a manner contrary to the way Moses commanded the Israelites, all it has done is created new forms of slavery and robbed people of human flourishing. We can never create a better world on the foundation of anger, hatred, and resentment. It only leads to tyranny and oppression. My hope is that by understanding how framing history affects the present and the future, that we can develop the skill of self-government with regard to our thought life in a way that creates a better world. We need to ask where the road leads from the ideas and values we adopt. We need to learn to frame our personal and corporate memory in a way that advances liberty rather than oppression. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and please subscribe to my channel.